And then, of course, you mentioned Disney. I mean, at the beginning, I think you hit it dead on right. In 2019, with Disney owning Marvel and Star Wars, and on top of their own existing back catalog, someone would have said Disney is a media mogul that simply can't lose. And then these two franchises of Marvel and Star Wars that everyone sort of thought were can't miss suddenly are duds. Right. And again, all the attention is on wokeism, but I think there are other layers to that as well.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of it's sort of the end of the superhero arc.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. Today we have our old friend of the channel, Paul VanderKlay, back for another Anadromist dialogue. And what I decided to do was to have a kind of a survey of the way things have changed since the year 2019. And the reason for that is because I've noticed a lot of things on YouTube. I've noticed things in the world, of course. I mean, it's been a period of tumultuous change. Everything from inflation to wars. Of course, there was that pandemic-y thing. A lot has changed. And I thought it would be interesting. And things have changed as far as the way people are asking questions. So I thought it'd be very interesting for us to go over this. And I thought, who better than to do it with Paul, who has been doing his channel very, very steadily during most of that period. So without any further ado, you know him, you love him, Paul VanderKlay from Sacramento, California, Pastor Paul VanderKlay of the Christian Reformed Church. Take it away, Paul.
Yeah. Well, how have you been?
I have been pretty good lately. I had a rough, my trip, I took a trip to Alaska to get I couldn't get everything because the estimate I got for one portion of the trip turned out $13,000 short, and I had raised about 20. But I just did, and it was too close to the end, and I just couldn't justify going on. I'd already come on with an emergency appeal once and couldn't justify going on again. So I had already bought my tickets to Alaska, and so I went there, and I did not get, what shall we say, nostalgic for Alaska. I arrived there, I was there for about 8 days in March, which I knew was like the worst time to go because, as I discovered in my trip, I only had, I had rain, snow, ice, a little bit of sun, sleet, and I was sleeping in a cabin that did have electricity and it was a teeny cabin with a teeny space heater, no running water, outdoor peat moss toilet for recycling. So, and I had to walk about 2 miles every day just to get to the post office, then pull out all this stuff and then put it all back in. And the way it was is I got about 28 boxes and sent them here. They arrived about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, good.
So it took about 2 months to get here. And there's a whole story. I put it in one of my, some of my videos, called the Library Diaries, about all the craziness involved. And then I probably, within a month and a half period, I was sick for about two and a half weeks because I got myself so tired from doing the work. And I'm 68, so I'm not like as they used to say when I was young, a spring chicken. I don't think people even know what a spring chicken is anymore. That I was, I'd picked up some fever I was stopping in different places along the way. And I stopped in London, where I'll talk to you a little bit later about my estuary meeting that I had there with Tayo and John Lumgar and some other people there. Quite nice. And I actually went to the Unheard offices and bumped into Freddie Sayer there briefly. And it was an interesting time. I met my friends who make puppet films, which is an understatement, the Quay brothers. Saw them. Then I went to Brussels, but somewhere in London, on the tube, most likely, I picked up some virus that I had about a day in Brussels where, unfortunately, I saw a nice puppet show, and then I spent 2 days completely wiped out with a fever, and I ended up recovering enough to go stay with some friends in a teensy-weensy little French village, which no one on earth outside of the French would ever go visit, which was great. I was staying with friends who were puppet carvers and things like that. And first 2 days I was there, I didn't even know where I was. I was just like, I didn't leave the house. When I did get out of the bed, I would go and sit in front of a little wood stove and just kind of feed it now and then to feel better about life. And but it turned out to be a wonderful little French village. I recovered enough to go through Paris on the way out, spend a couple days there, and then I met I don't know if you've ever had encounters with him, John Halley. He's a Northern Irish guy who lives in Greece. He follows me on my channel, and I met up with him, had very good conversation, spent a day there, and then in Athens, and then ended up back in Tbilisi, where it seemed like I was fine, but there was some coughing plague going around, and I picked it up for a week or so. But at this point, I was just like, fine, I'll just crash. And, I don't have the brain power for anything, but I'll do some vegetating with some series to watch on. I have some DVDs and Blu-rays to catch up on. But then, since then, I've re-entered life here. Things are good. And I got my stuff, which was most important. My whole puppet and theater library is here. Plus, I picked up lots of journals and my art and letters and such. So I feel like I'm officially here after over 5 years. But yeah. So yeah, things are good now. Last 3 weeks or so, I feel like, okay, I'm back. I feel re-energized. But it was one of these trips. It was like, yes, memorable. Yes, I probably had to take it. Would I want to do that kind of trip again? No. So I've decided if I go back for the rest of it, I'm going to have to, a couple of years down the line. Since I had extra money, I paid 2 years worth of storage fees. I paid, did some other things, and paid lots of money for the boxes I sent through the mail, thousands of dollars. Wow. By the time it was done, plus a comical session with customs here. Session, we'll say 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
You can convince them that all of this stuff was strictly for your own personal use and not for resale.
That wasn't even the issue. I mean, they never really cared about that. They only cared about me filling the forms out a certain way, and they didn't communicate well. They would use words like, please correct this form. Correct to me in English means I take the form as it is and make a correction.
Yeah.
But what they wanted it in the appropriate way they wanted to see it, which of course they didn't explain to me ever. It took me ages. So anyway, things are good, and I'm more enthused about writing. The most important thing in the whole, the journals were most important, but out of that, the most important thing is I have a handwritten draft of a 400-page rough draft of a novel that I was really hoping to finish up. I could have finished it up so easily during COVID and all the rest of it, but it's here, and I was so afraid it might not be here. There were reasons why. So,
all right. Well, congratulations.
And, by the way, congratulations, or as they say in Georgia, Gilasoft, on your son's wedding. How was that?
You. That was great. That was great. Jared got married. It was up in the foothills. It was a lovely venue. It was a lovely evening. Everything just went off really, really well. So that was wonderful. And now we are preparing for Italy, which comes next month. And
Oh, really?
yeah, so I have another son who he and his fiance decided they wanted to do a destination wedding in Italy. So the whole family is flying to Italy.
Which city?
Well, the wedding is going to be outside of Florence. But
Okay, outside is good. Florence is a great place, but middle of summer, it's going to be like, one sardine navigating through other sardines.
yeah. So, and we are going to do because there's no cheap way to fly to Italy in the summer. So we are going to be doing Pompeii, Rome, Florence, the wedding, and then, stuff in northern Italy, and then leave out of Venice. So it's going to be insane, but it's going to be with, when you get to this point, when you have something big like this that brings all of the kids together and nobody's going to miss Italy or the wedding, then it's
right.
Well,
good thing you're living in Sacramento. You know what hot weather is like. Because
I know what hot weather's like. The only thing is, I know enough that I'm not going to be traipsing through Italy in short pants because
we can't go into the churches.
I know, so I had to. I've been purchasing a few things so that I have long pants that I won't die in, and I'm not bringing. Kale Zeldin will be very happy to know I'm not bringing any jeans to Italy. So.
Yeah, I know. It's his mission in life. It's a good goal, but he is just so funny about that.
So, Kale, no jeans to Italy. I'm going to the heart of your church, and I won't be seen in denim at all.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is, it'll be super crowded. As much as the Vatican Museum is great, at that time of year, the lines to get in are about 2 hours long. If for some reason you decide you have to do that, then buy the tickets ahead of time. Don't stand in line.
Yeah.
And that's a hack there for you.
Yeah.
But do go into St. Peter's, which doesn't require a ticket. And if you look off, there are things to see in there, but if you look off to the right, as soon as you walk in, you'll see the Pietà, which broke me. I was just, someone, I think it was my friend John Halley, wrote about something that I just put on my new Anadrome channel, which is more dedicated towards music and culture. He was talking about how noisy and crazy everything was. And I said, well, the people, I commented back saying the people I knew in New York City in the 90s were so far removed from the old ideals of Western culture that Michelangelo doesn't even exist for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons among many why just seeing that, I was just like, oh my God, I'd heard about this all my life, but I had no idea how powerful a statue it was. And if you're there on a Sunday, you can go see the Pope.
We will not be in Rome on a Sunday. We did last night, myself, my youngest son, and one of my daughters, or both of my daughters actually, we were all on a Zoom call, and we were all trying to get the official tickets to find one way or another into the Colosseum and that whole complex there, which we wanted to get a guided tour. I mean, if you spend a lot of money, you can sort of secure one easily. But if you want to get in for like the price, and because we've got 8 of us that are going to be in that crew, so we stayed up. We're up like 1 a.m. It was like 10 o'clock Rome time, but we secured tickets. So we are now in the hunt for tickets for this and that and this and that, so we can
entering Tom Holland territory.
Yeah, I'll be. I wish I had. Like when I go into Roman Catholic churches, I wish I had my pocket Kale Zeldin and my pocket Father Eric, and when I go to, I wish I had a pocket Tom Holland that could sort of give me. Right. But we'll do the best with the guides we have there, and I'm sure I'll learn a ton, and then I will bother.
I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on when you get back, talking to us about that, because that'll be really fascinating.
It'll be very different from the 2 Europe trips that I've taken already, because those were much more estuary things, and so those were much more people oriented. This is going to be
the truth is, the way I've heard it explained is that Tuscany alone, which includes Florence and the birthplace of the Etruscans, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, Tuscany alone has more official treasures than the rest of Europe combined.
Oh.
And all of Italy has more than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's just so much history. It's like everywhere you walk there, it's just amazing historical relics and such. And the Italians go on just eating their pasta, you know.
Well, I'm super excited that my kids are really excited for this, and so you know, one of my daughters has just dedicated herself to doing all the internet research and finding the ways in and finding the things to get. So, which is wonderful because my wife and I are busy just with everything else.
Tell them if they're taking trains to expect the trains will be late.
Okay.
Do not schedule anything for tight connections with the trains in Italy. I mean, I took a train from Palermo in Sicily all the way to Rome, and it was about 8 hours off. I'm serious. The Italian train system is notorious. So,
well, I am typing a note to so we have all these little chats in our family for all these different things. And so for the Rome planning, I'm going to say the trains will always be late, even catastrophically late.
Absolutely. Yeah. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have a tight connection somewhere, like from one train station to another. I did do that actually coming from Switzerland. I went through the mountains, through a tunnel, got off at Milan, and my train to Genoa was relatively on time. But my train from Sicily was not. So it could be the further south you go, the more sluggish things get, which is pretty typical of Italy. So, although if someone gave me a ticket and said you can go for free and stay for a week in Rome, or you can go back to Palermo, I'd take the Palermo ticket in a heartbeat. I just found that fascinating. Maybe it was like growing up in New York City among all the Sicilians, you know. It's like, hey, you got Vinny the fish and Tony the clam, you know. So what I was thinking that it would be interesting. You've been doing this. You started this when did you start the Peterson stuff? 2017?
2017.
Yeah. So by 2019, you were kind of in a groove. Would you say the TLC had started by then? It probably didn't have a name yet, did it?
No, it didn't have a name yet. Sevilla coined it at some time. I think it was in 2018. She coined it, but I think a lot of what people talk about the TLC today is really the continued development of what started at Bridges of Meaning.
Right.
Even though this little corner Sevilla was talking about myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke, Jonathan has continued to develop his symbolic world. Vervaeke has the Vervaeke Foundation, and the thing around me has more been TLC. So I think that really got what you notice in the live streams and all this chatter today, that really got going out of the conferences, Thunder Bay and Chino, and the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and then
warmed up during the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah, very much warmed up from the pandemic.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with, I was just wanting to talk about the differences between now and say the last 5 years, right before the pandemic, and talk about it personally. We'll get to the TLC, but I also wanted to talk about it in terms of YouTube culture. I wanted to talk about it in terms of church, change in churches and things like that. And I'm going to start off with, I've just got 5 years here that I'm just going to quickly read some of the things that are just, for me, were highlights of what was going on during that time. I'm not going to comment on them much. I'm just going to read them. And if we want, we can discuss one or another of those things. But because I think just reading them gives you an idea of the certain kind of the tenor of the time. So if you go back to 2019, the cold culture war was getting warm. It was getting pretty warm. You had the Hong Kong protests. You had the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France. There were big protest movements. Both of them were not the kind of protest movements that we would see in 2020. That is to say, they were against the larger structure in communist China or the French EU kind of thing. Then we had we weren't officially calling everything woke culture yet. Woke in 2019 was still very specifically in the Black world. Greta Thunberg, remember her? Yep. Big Greta Thunberg was huge during that time, and has since fallen off the map, basically, although I think she showed up at a Just Say No Oil thing. Peterson was in decline. Jordan Peterson was in decline, but we didn't know it. He was still, certainly at the beginning of the year, still doing so many of his tours, doing the 12 Rules for Life. Then it was interesting. It was actually a very big and important year for movies. And at the same time, it was the end of so many of for instance, basically the last Marvel movie came out that year. And since then, they have essentially, well, they've cost Disney over $1 billion, all of Disney's things. We'll mention that again in a moment. Star Wars had its last official movie then, which got pretty bad reviews and pretty much ended we haven't seen another Star Wars movie since then, and the TV shows keep getting worse reviews. And Game of Thrones came to a sputtering end. And so those were three huge zeitgeisty things from the teens that have since fallen off the map. In 2020, the big three things was we had the pandemic, we had the George Floyd protests, and then we had very crazy presidential election ending with the January 6th at the Capitol. 2021, the world is still in lockdown. The vaccines arrived, but are highly doubted and contested. But there are rumblings of things changing. We're starting to just feel some things at that time, but we'll talk about that probably later. Streaming becomes huge during the pandemic. And so you have all these companies opening up streaming channels, Disney Plus, Paramount, whatever they were doing, Hulu, and I can't remember who they're connected to, CBS maybe. Then we have trans issues start to really take center stage. No, yeah. Oh, I'm in 2021, sorry. That's the next year. We have a disastrous end to our involvement in Afghanistan. So disastrous that I'm pretty sure that convinced someone in Russia to do something the next year. And then Jordan Peterson returns, although very frail, very in ill health. 2022, Russia invades Ukraine in February. Omicron fades on the COVID front, and by halfway in the middle of the year, the pandemic is pretty much over in most places except Canada and Japan. Culture slowly reemerges. You have Queen Elizabeth dies, which is the end of an era. You have Roe v. Wade overturned. You have, this is where the trans issues take more center stage and a lot more going on there. Musk buys Twitter. The alternative media, which is, we'll call it radical center or anti-woke or something, because it's not the far right, but basically the people questioning all of what was going on during the pandemic and whatnot. So you have Unheard, Trigonometry, Daily Wire, The Sacred, Lotus Eaters, Timcast, etc., all creating more professional platforms. And this is when we start to really see the TLC forming during this period as well. 2023, war continues in Ukraine, and then in October, we have the Israel-Palestine situation on October 7th, which then creates all of the stuff that's been going on since then, which, interestingly enough, both the Ukrainian, COVID, the Ukrainian Russia-Ukraine situation and the Israel-Palestine situation have splintered people up in all sorts of ways that you couldn't have guessed. Like a week before the Palestine terrorists, invaded Israel, you would never guess that so many Jewish people would be questioning the narrative. And suddenly, that was like a tipping point against wokeness, because with trans issue was getting extreme, but then the Palestine thing got very strange for a lot of people. Also during this time, during 2023, it seems like the larger political world is in some sort of weird holding pattern where no one can, at this point, can possibly predict what 2030 will look like. Any number of scenarios. It's not like we'll be in the Cold War for another 10 years, the way it was during the Soviet era. You have things like the Barbenheimer phenomena. Taylor Swift emerges as the most, the probably superstar of the world at that time. Disney loses $1 billion over the course of the year through their kind of mismanagement of all the franchises and companies they bought. So whether it was the Lucasfilms or the Marvel or Pixar, and a lot of it is their woke messaging. YouTube, however, is doing very well during this period because streaming essentially is losing everyone money. So because they kept thinking somehow that the pandemic era would go on. Spotify and other music streaming also has basically gutted out most of the music industry. I saw something on how much musicians get if you have how much does it take to get $1,000 off of Spotify? And the answer is hundreds of thousands of views, listens, and it's even worse for a lot of the other ones that do it. So AI comes to the fore. You have more anti-EU protests, particularly of workers in Germany, the Netherlands, more Gilets jaunes in France, people basically critiquing this kind of austerity program for climate change that the EU wants to subtract, 10% of every country's land for doing nothing and just being wild again. And essentially during this time, the public mask is slipping on the woke utopian vision. And so that to me is just a quick overview. I mean, right now we're still in this holding pattern. A lot of these things are still happening. There are lots more I could have mentioned, but this was just something that came to me. One of the reasons YouTube is doing well, and YouTube has changed a lot in these 5 years. So if you can remember what it looked like to go through your subscriptions on YouTube in 2019, now everyone's got these big, bold letters, a lot of AI photos, or artwork, a lot of, it just feels more professional in many ways, lots more advertising going on. I'll just stop there. Do you have any thoughts about anything or the general tone?
Yeah. One thought, of course, is, as you well know, part of what's so difficult about orientation during history is things happen in all of these years that we're not paying any attention to now because we have no perspective on it. Exactly. And so obviously the filter that we look at these things is through our filter. Yeah, when you said YouTube is doing well, it's interesting. So I just quickly Googled, how well YouTube is doing in terms of profits, its financial models, and this is one of the interesting dynamics, which is that when we say YouTube is doing well, YouTube, so one of these little charts here in 2022, valuation right. versus listed peers, Disney is 170 billion value or 187 billion, and YouTube is 183 billion, and then Netflix is 98 billion. So YouTube, in terms of that kind of valuation, is worth twice as much as Netflix, right. And one of the interesting data points was David Fuller, who, of course, seemed to be running a very thriving YouTube operation in Rebel Wisdom. I remember when he decided, when he announced that he was going to pull the plug on Rebel Wisdom and do something else, his desire I don't remember if it's what he told me or what he told someone else, was, he wanted to do things on Netflix and Amazon. Those would be the platforms that he was aspiring to. And then as he began to talk to peers who were also documentary filmmakers, they wanted to make it big on YouTube. And so it's interesting how we evaluate these things. Yet part of what's difficult about YouTube is that it is so massive. I regularly have the experience of bumping into not only a YouTuber that I've never heard of that's, well into 6 figures of subs and maybe even 7, but whole areas of YouTube that have significant followings that I was completely unaware of. And so, YouTube is like the world in that way, in that it is so massive. Yet I'm not always sure how much money how profitable YouTube makes. I remember Sam making a comment to me about, how YouTube is sort of barely profitable. And then you look at these other social media platforms who are basically the same thing. These social media platforms have enormous cultural clout,
right?
But as businesses, Twitter's been that way the whole time. They've always been marginal, even though they have tremendous social clout. So it's a rather interesting anti-capitalist phenomenon. And then, of course, you mentioned Disney. I mean, at the beginning, I think you hit it dead on right. In 2019, with Disney owning Marvel and Star Wars, on top of their own existing back catalog, someone would have said Disney is a media mogul that simply can't lose. And then these two franchises of Marvel and Star Wars that everyone sort of thought were can't miss suddenly are duds.
Right.
And again, all the attention is on wokeism, but I think there are other layers to that as well.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of it's sort of the end of the superhero arc. And
well,
so yeah.
One thing that's interesting that also arrived during this last period on the YouTube sphere is you have people like The Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic and all these other guys, and they've formed their whole other fifth column of people who are like, we're tired of not getting decent stories. We're tired of having the message poured down our throats. We're tired of, putting the girl boss in front of every, there isn't anything that a 5-foot girl boss can't beat up, including a 7-foot guy, and they're tired of that. So, and that's actually seems to be having an effect on the box office.
Yeah, well, the question is, are they having an effect, or are they expressing what is being also reflected in the box office?
Right.
And part of what I've been thinking of is that we are simply overwhelmed with signals right now, that it is so hard to get any signal. For example, are Kardashians Barbies or girl bosses? I mean, what really is this intersection between? I mean, maybe Taylor Swift is just the epitome of that. Where, right. and so you have all of these signals where supposedly wokeness is destroying the culture, and Ellen DeGeneres is the future of the feminine, but then Kim Kardashian. So is it Ellen DeGeneres or Kim Kardashian that is the future?
Actually, they're both pretty out now.
Yeah.
Ellen got booted off her show, and the Kardashians are like just seen as like what's happening is women are changing, but there's a whole discussion here, and I'd love to hear Jordan Peterson. I don't know if if he's done anything on this, but the whole concept of social contagion. And why is it young girls are so susceptible for this? Young guys are just basically meatheads looking to run around and express their, inner testosterone nature. Whereas girls are always looking at each other and going like, should I get bigger lips now? Should I shave my eyebrows? What should I do? So.
And the bigger lips are hilarious because, I hear guys are like this big lip thing that women are doing. Like, who's that for? I mean, exactly. I didn't walk around and think, I want my girls with bigger lips. I think I wasn't thinking at all about their lips. It's sort of like Seinfeld, boobs and shoes. It's like, men are looking at boobs and women are looking at shoes, and they're still just sort of,
Right. I did a very unscientific survey on my ex Twitter page, and where I asked the following questions. When women and their eye makeup, what do you prefer? A, very noticeable. B, barely noticeable. C, just following the trends. D, none. D, overwhelmingly with B following in behind. And then some said following the trends because I guess they didn't want to get in trouble with their girlfriends. And only one guy said very noticeable. And I'm sitting there going, and I've been thinking about this. I said, so then what is the point of all the eye makeup that women put on? It isn't for the patriarchy. It isn't for us. I don't want to see it. Most guys get freaked out by fake eyelashes and stuff. So what is it? And then I realized my mother, when she was young, in a very politically incorrect way, would talk about when she was going out, putting on her war paint. And I look at it as either a form of defense or in some cases offense.
Yeah.
Because if you I'm actually thinking of doing a video on this, just comparing women with the serious eye makeup versus women with almost none or none. And what you realize is when women don't have eye makeup on, they look vulnerable.
Huh. That's interesting.
But with it, they look like, they've done something to themselves. It's like things pop out in different ways. But, guys are kind of stupid. If women if it's a beautiful woman and she's got eye makeup, he's not going to say anything. But in fact, she is not getting influenced by him whatsoever to put that on.
No. And I don't know about in Georgia, but lately my wife made a comment about some woman. She said that woman had caterpillars on her eyelids, and there was a woman that my wife and I went into this restaurant. We sit down, and this young girl, she's probably a 17, 18-year-old or something, and it's a very attractive girl. She got these caterpillars on her eyelids, and I'm just thinking
that's the Kardashian effect.
Yeah, what are those caterpillars about?
Fake eyelashes back and the Brazilian butt lift surgery. But now people are starting to go back and get it removed so they have their normal asses. And I'm sitting there going but in a way, I think this, there's always a bit of social contagion. We are always influenced by what other people are thinking.
Yes.
And there's a certain amount of guys who are just like, whatever, dear, if that's okay, we'll do this, In
terms of the big five, that was correlated with agreeableness, right? Because again, statistically, women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men.
Yeah.
And so agreeableness is going to probably result itself in more mimetic rivalry around eyelashes and eye makeup and who knows what else. And
I heard a very interesting, I'm trying to remember what channel I heard this on, a very interesting interview with a woman who has a book on trans and feminist issues, but it wasn't Louise Perry. It was, and who was she talking to? Was it, no, Mary Harrington doesn't have a channel. And it was someone like that who has a channel. Anyway, she got into talking about social contagion. And I'm just sitting there going yeah, this is such a thing.
Yeah.
And, how much of the trans movement is there as a result of social contagion?
Well, Peterson has, in terms of talking about contagion, that's the context that Peterson uses the word most in. And of course, Jonathan Haidt, in terms of social media, women, basically women compete in terms of reputation. And so women tend to, compete in terms of reputation, savaging, and men just, we just hit each other, generally speaking. So, yeah. So,
what's interesting is that I was on my trip. I went out and I passed through London, and I saw about 5 trans men, and with the exception of one of them who passed for a few minutes, most of them I just immediately, oh, okay, that's was born a man, and I thought to myself,
wait. You mean they were trans women?
Yes.
Yeah, because the trans women are always way easier to spot.
Exactly.
The trans men can with some testosterone and some facial hair. Once you see some facial hair, even if it's a little dude,
yeah, you just
with
read
skinny wrists. You look at well, that's just a little dude.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought to myself, they're always imitating women. It's always an imitation of women. That is to say, and what women are they? They're the women who wear the eye makeup. In other words, and I was thinking to myself, would there be a trans movement the way there is now on the male to female side, were there not Kim Kardashian?
Yeah. That's well, and Caitlyn Jenner. I mean, the kind of woman that Caitlyn decides she wants to become. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's the image that they're becoming. But what's interesting is they don't ever want to become the woman without the makeup.
Right. They don't want to become a butch lesbian woman.
No. They don't want to become Ariel Scarcella.
I don't know who that is. I just know,
she's an anti-woke lesbian. Very, very funny woman, but also very Italian background, very, very spiky. You touch her, but I like watching her talk when I do now and then. But it seems like YouTube has. It seems like there are lots more channels now. Of like back in if we look at 2019, you had to really search around to find channels of interesting people to watch. Whereas now that there's lots of people doing kind of overlapping. And I noticed, for instance, speaking of women, there are 3 younger girls who have a fairly good following. There are probably more, but it's like Brett Cooper, Amala Ekpanobi, and Misha Petrov. And they're all Americans, and they're all very, they all used to be more left-wing when they were younger and became more conservative as they got older and questioned the narrative that society gives us. But it's interesting, they've all built up, Brett Cooper is on Daily Wire, and she went from 0, what is she at? Over 4 million viewers now. And in a very short period of time, Amala Ekpanobi is half Nigerian, and her mother is white. And but she was on PragerU, and now she's independent. And this other girl, Misha, she has a smaller following, but she has like Russian heritage and such. But I noticed that they're kind of going after these younger girls and saying, "Hey, wake up! We can't all do what they're telling us we should do." And they often talk about TikTok pages. And the very strange sort of forms of dating rituals and things like that. That's just one example of what I mean. It's just like there's so many channels now. People, I think it's a good sign. People questioning because the larger narrative is still there. The corporations, all the other social media, but X, Twitter, the big corporations, although this year people pointed out they didn't put so many rainbow flags on for their corporate logos.
Oh, really?
And I think we're seeing many people have said we kind of hit a peak because it got. And I think that it was a combination of just some of the extremes of the trans ideology, which even have driven the LG and B people crazy.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole thing that has been happening because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has taken a group of people. I follow all sorts of different people in different spheres, and I noticed that all the Jewish people who were very, very liberal 5 minutes before suddenly went, uh-oh, because suddenly they saw that this wasn't an isolated thing. you know.
Nellie Bowles, her, the interviews that I've watched of her, part of where this has sort of pushed me is I think it is easy to have a deep sense of nihilism because it is so difficult to actually construct a narrative from the data because there's way too much data.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, so I wind up talking to a lot of people who are getting a start on YouTube, and somewhere deep in their heart of hearts, they really wish to be the next Brett Cooper or Jordan Peterson or name some 6 or 7 figure YouTuber in a particular genre or category or cultural space.
Right.
And one of the things, so I've watched people try to hit these things, and I know I've watched a lot of people try to hit these things. And what's abundantly clear is for every Brett Cooper, there are thousands of Brett Cooper wannabes out there. And so I was talking to one YouTuber I know who has a 7-figure channel in a particular niche. And he was talking to me about the fact he is in his mid 20s at this point. He was talking to me about the fact that some young, I think probably junior high kids have they've sort of distilled they've done relevance realization on his channel, and they've sort of figured out exactly the subtle little moves he makes that he thinks at least is part of what has made his channel successful. And the kinds of things that he's done to make his channel successful they're not rocket science. I mean, there's tons of YouTubes and yet tons of coaches out there, coaches without successful channels that'll tell you how to be a success. And they're not necessarily wrong. Mm-hmm. But we're in this space where the dynamics of hierarchy are simultaneously a little bit more obvious and even more mysterious at the same time. And so we have set before us a series of seeming contradictions that we can't quite exhaust or get to the bottom of, but have to recognize their validity. And I think something like YouTube and these many, many communities, I think deeply impact us with this nihilism and cause a degree of skepticism that nihilism tends to feed. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because it's, and even the data point of, fewer corporations, because that's something you can measure. You can say, okay, we're going to look at corporations over a certain amount of value. We're going to look at amount of signaling that they're paying. We have not been bombarded this June with rainbows like we have in past, but that's simply my subjective experience. But once you said that, it's like, okay, why not? Well, there's 2 answers for this. One is that, maybe wokeism is receding, which I think is true. And the other is that much of what has changed has now been normalized. Right. And even the whole idea of passing is part of that. So, so I think to some degree for so many people who are alphabet people, let's say, they don't want to be recognized as of a category. They want to be seen as normal people who happen to be LGBT, whatever. And so, but again, you've got that at the same time as you have people who are leaning into their category in such crazy, crazy ways. I mean, lately my wife and I were watching a little bit of Survivor again. And so we turn on that Paramount Plus, and RuPaul's Jag Show is, there's like 1 minute of mandatory advertising. And it's like, I always look at that thing and I'm like, what on earth is that really about? And just as you say, because these are not people who are trying to pass for the 54-year-old lesbian mom that lives on my block, who her and her lesbian partner basically are, boy, I could get in trouble for this, but I'll just describe how they are as individuals. They are in their mid to late 50s. They are overweight. They wear fairly pedestrian clothing. They wear fairly masculine clothing. They've got
I know the type. We had some in Alaska like that.
Yeah. And they've raised a couple of kids now. I knew their kids because they'd come and swim in our pool, yada, yada, yada. And, this is normal. When you ask me, okay, what's an empty nest lesbian couple look like? I think about these people because I know these people.
Right.
They don't look anything like I see on RuPaul.
No, not at all. Yeah, they're diametrically opposed.
Yes.
And, yeah.
So I think we're challenged even to dare to categorize anything, because I love your list, and you going through your list, there's just provoking insights in me, and yet there's almost nothing. Has the war, something I wanted to ask you, how has the war in Ukraine changed how Georgia feels? Because I see YouTube videos that sometimes talk about, well, Georgia's nervous because of the Russians, or maybe Russia can't do anything with Georgia because and look at Taiwan. Is China going to invade Taiwan? Oh, within the next 3 years. China's never going to do this. We're just simply bombarded with these contradictory messages. We just don't have any idea to sort our way through.
The recently late Catholic philosopher Paul Virilio from France said he had a book called The Information Bomb, and he said it dropped probably in the 90s, and it had so much information that you can no longer hold on to it. Back when, there were 3 or 4 channels on television, there was a paper in your, 1 or 2 papers in your local area, when people weren't all hooked up to this thing, you could kind of manage the information that was coming in. And as I pointed out in a recent video called Why Do We Think What We Do? When I was young, and maybe when you were young, I could walk down the street. No matter what was happening, I could take a walk somewhere and have nothing in my ears, no words. There were little transistor radios, just one little speaker that went in there. You didn't listen to it very long, but basically, your brain was clear to think about something that had come. Whereas now, the temptation is to constantly be plugged in. I know that's the temptation for me.
Yep.
And because I do pay attention to stuff because of my channels, I realize, wow, and there's something about getting words in your ears all the time. You watch stuff too, but it's often, as Marshall McLuhan once said, it's a lot more acoustic than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
It's more about hearing because, well, it's the word, it's the stories, it's all of that stuff going in. And I think words and stories hit the meaning button inside of us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
Well, my next question, though, is how do you think the churches have been affected by the events of, say, the last 5 years? I know you're going through all this stuff with your church. Now, this was all stuff that was also in the pipeline before this began.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, so there's been a little bit of hubbub in the CRC over the fact that for the first time, and I would have to go through again. So in this, the one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about is sort of the rise of shamanism again, because some of the thinking about shamanism is the way that so I'm listening to PAX right now. I'm doing. I'm going through Tom Holland's PAX, so right. You've got the chicken bones or the tea leaves. Basically, you've got these, you're trying to add a degree of randomness in so you can try to detect signal to noise. And right. So you very quickly realize that if you're subscribed to YouTube, your main feed has been colonized by algo. And in fact, all of my filters are corrupt because algo thinks it because I searched this one thing. Algo thinks I want to watch 10 more videos of it. It's like, no, I already saw that. I've moved on. So then we try to randomize our feeds. So we're always, on the quest for the signal to noise challenge. And so what happens then in Synod 2024 is, for the first time in I don't know how many years, probably since the 90s, we have 4 male officers from Midwestern churches elected as officers to Synod. Because over the last number of years, there was sort of a tradition that arose where we're probably going to pick what seems to be likely the most qualified person for president, because they actually have to chair the meeting. And that's usually based on how much Senate experience have they had. Because if you have an incompetent chair, the meeting's really uncomfortable. But after that, the other 3 positions in terms of the officers, it's mostly symbolic. So then we're going to have a woman, we're going to have someone without a Dutch last name, probably a skin color darker than mine, and we're going to have a Canadian. Because you got to keep the Canadians happy, you got to keep the POCs happy, you got to keep the women happy. So that then were your candidates, and it kind of became, nobody gave an order to Synod to do that. Synod just did it, and now that this Synod has 4 millennial, I think one's an extra maybe, but 4 millennial Midwestern clergy is like, huh.
Well, they're all millennial. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's the age. Well, one might be an extra, but I'm not sure. But I think they're 3 of the 4 are millennials. Somebody wrote that because now suddenly, and this is why, to bring it back to the TLC, this is why I value kind of the community creation that the TLC is. In terms of YouTube, the TLC is not that big and it is not very important. But it's extremely valuable to me because what it does is give me a network of other noticers. So Grim Grizz mentioned this morning in his live stream that CW announced that he's taking a 5-year break from the TLC. And I thought, 5 years, huh? I don't even know if it'll still be here when you get back. And he said, well, when I get back, if it's still here, then I know it's something important. I said, okay. But part of what the TLC is an opportunity to listen to other noticers. So like Estuary, whereas people think the TLC is about talking because we have just videos full of talk, there's many more times as much listening as talking. And the thing that occurred to me after the recent 27-hour marathon that happened was just how strangely diverse this thing is, because depending on sort of when you dropped in, you could either hear a bunch of people who are much more towards the perennialism talking about Buddhism and all of those things, or you could hear people who were, trad Christians or trad Jews working on their stuff. And it's like, and yet all of this is somehow in a category, and I suspect this is a category for collective relevance realization, where we are listening to each other because we can no longer trust YouTube or ABC News or the New York Times or Fox News to work in a productive way, the signal to noise challenge that we all face.
See, I wonder if the church isn't heading into a period of serious syncretism.
Well, it depends on if you mean syncretism. See, because here's so one of the things that arose in the discussion was I came in and, because, Ortho Bros and Orthodoxy, that's all hotness here in the United States. And if somebody said, Bern, are those beautiful, historic, traditional Orthodox churches just busting at the seams in Tbilisi, Georgia? You would say,
you want an answer?
Yeah.
I would say it depends on the day.
Yeah. And in other words, there's a, part of the, and I feel a little bad because I pushed on Sherry a little bit, because Sherry on a live stream basically said, what I really appreciated about the Orthodox, and there isn't an Orthodox church near me, so I didn't have to feel guilty about not going every Sunday. Right. And then I was thinking, and that wasn't her major factor, I know, but it's that the Orthodox in America have this leadership crisis that is so catastrophic right now. I mean, they really do not have anywhere near the kinds of priests they would need to deploy to actually manage what the internet is feeding them.
Right. And they also don't have a specific branch of Orthodoxy to call the American branch.
Right. So in other words, your syncretism point is, I mean, generally speaking, when Christians think about the evils of syncretism, they might say, oh, see same-sex marriage. There's the evil of syncretism at work. But
no, I'm not thinking that.
Okay.
I'm thinking religious concepts.
Okay.
Almost exclusively.
Okay.
Because Jordan Peterson comes along, and I love Jordan. I've listened to tons of Jordan. I've heard all of his longer lectures and products and such. I don't watch every interview he does, but I have watched a certain percentage of them that's certainly higher than 50 to 60%. At the same time, he has a way of bringing things together, which is actually his strength. However, as I've always learned in life, on the flip side of a person's strengths are weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses is, for instance, he immediately starts talking about Jung, which sends off a certain amount of people talking about Jung. Now, I had already done my research on Jung. I have about 4 serious books of Jung's, and I also have a book called The Jung Cult, written by a guy named, Mark Knoll? There's Knoll. There's 2 Knowles. One of them is known for all the Christian stuff, but this guy is a Knoll too. Okay. But the interesting thing about that is he goes through and points out exactly the religious nature of Jungianism, which is very different from Christianity, although this book is not a Christian book to my knowledge. Right. But I read that and I said, Jung is all about syncretism. He's all about blending religious structures together. So, for instance,
it's a perennialist move. I mean, it's samey, and
well, it's just like the psychedelics argument comes up regularly, but that's a wanting to include it into a traditional religious environment. Whereas I understand both my Judaism and my Christianity is, we're not about seeking spiritual experience. We're about asking for forgiveness for thinking that through our spiritual attempts, we can make ourselves righteous before God.
Right.
And so, Paul may say, I was caught up into the 7th heaven or something. What heaven was he caught up into? Oh, pastor.
Third.
Anyway, the point is, he never says he was seeking that.
Right.
Every spiritual experience in the Bible does not come from people seeking it. When the witch of Endor talks to Saul, well, actually, that's really scary. And he was but he was seeking and got in trouble. Right. And also, there is a whole problem with spiritual technique and stuff like that. So it's very easy. One person I would really love to have you talk to sometime is my friend Ellis, who is a former Buddhist monk. Yeah. And he is also very good on discussing Eastern religion and such, and knows, whatever I know is just like nothing compared to him. But he's now a Christian pastor, and he went through L'Abri, and he's about, 10 years older than I am, but he's certainly open to talking. But the point is this, it's that I wonder, it's not just Jordan Peterson and such, but we're in a time when people are looking to harmonize. And that's where you get the syncretisms. In a sense, the syncretism always works in the favor of Eastern religion in the end, because Hinduism is a big bowl you can mix anything into.
Yeah.
You
can find anything in there.
Exactly.
It's got everything in there. Oh, you like this? There it is. There it is.
And yeah.
Well,
so
my thinking on. Go ahead.
Well, that also brings me to, I wanted to talk more about the Orthodox, the Ortho Bros, and what's been your thought? I mean, because I think this thing has, if we go back 5 years ago, Peugeot was already there. We had some of this, but it seems to have grown. And I wanted to get more of your thoughts about the nature of that growth, particularly in America. Although I had Dutch guy Peter who came here. He was a member of estuary groups in the Netherlands and stuff, and he was definitely on the Orthodox. He wasn't a full baptized member yet, charismated, I believe would be the right word. But he was certainly very, very, what shall we say, reverent before the icons and stuff. So it's interesting to me that in the West, this is coming forward. What has been, I mean, of course, you get this question all the time, but if you could summarize your feelings about the way this has grown within the Western churches, or not the Western churches, maybe it's the churches, maybe it's coming from outside. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's disconnected from your syncretism, and it's not disconnected from this issue of signal to noise and narrative to data, because there's clearly in the frenetic, in the whirlwind of data without narrative that we are currently submerged. There's a deep desire for a strong signal. And Orthodoxy in America has a few different benefits. Number one, it's new. It's not new to the world, but it's new to a lot of people.
Right.
And so, I mean, again, I remember this woman on the Rebel Wisdom Campfire. They're talking about the evils of the Protestants and the Catholics and the ways, the violence that they had done and the political machinations and manipulations over the years. Well, maybe Orthodoxy doesn't have any of that. And I thought, okay, new to you, I guess.
Yeah,
and I don't know a lot of Orthodox history, but
read Solzhenitsyn's letter to, I think it's the Archimandrite Pimen or something like that, where he taught. The whole thing is like, why are you bowing down to the Soviets?
So, and so people are hungering and longing for for something that is both new and old. And this, when I got to Sacramento from Latin America and I was trying to get up to speed on what's going on in church in North America, already then the ancient modern thing was coming on strong. And the churches that we planted in Sacramento, which were planted in the seeker methodology, the cell methodology, all of those new churches became ancient modern with more rigorous liturgy, weekly communion, observance of much more disciplined observance of the lectionary, et cetera, et cetera. All of that. So that there's this big thing that moves through, and people are looking for something stable. They're looking for a strong signal in the midst of the noise. And so a steep slope religion like Orthodoxy or Latin Mass Catholic, I mean, if that's, I just had a conversation with a lovely couple who went to my church for a little while, but then, long story. And then he called me out of the blue, said, "Oh, let's have lunch." I said, "That's great." So we had lunch, and he and his wife are Latin Mass Catholics now. And I wasn't in any way surprised by that, because they are sort of the picture of a millennial couple who now has a couple of kids. They've settled down. They were both raised Protestant, serious Protestants, but found in Latin Mass Catholicism an order and a flourishing of young families that they didn't really want the big box, because really both of them came out of the big box evangelical, and they wanted something that didn't feel quite so made up on the fly.
Right.
Now, and then I think, I did a video not too long ago. I think, ironically, also the Orthodoxy in some of their vast theological storehouse, because here's the thing about Orthodoxy. if there's something you're looking for, when they open up that storehouse, you can find it. And one of those things that has sort of bothered the challenge of pluralism in the Western world is hell. And Orthodoxy both lets you be something of a universalist, meaning you don't have to think uncomfortable thoughts about the challenge of hell, both that and be a conservative Christian at the same time, instead of like being a universal, a UU. So it answers that. And you can be an artist. So in our image-based culture, so in many ironic ways, Orthodoxy is a serious competitor to, I still don't have a proper name for it. The Collinses call it the urban monoculture. They have a really good pitch to people who are a little bit exhausted by Western media culture. And so we can have silence, we can have tradition. Isn't it sort of wonky cool to go with Paul King's North and look at 50 wells in Ireland? And you can be nerdy. You can, at the same time, you can have a stable family. You can have, hopefully, a priest who can pay some kind of attention to you. I mean, it fits the bill. And so to me, it's not surprising. Now, in time, the question is going to be, how will, number one, the fact that the market is driving people to it, how will that market change Orthodoxy? Because again, I was talking, this wasn't a recorded conversation, but I was talking to a reporter who grew up in Canada, married a Romanian woman, is now living in Romania, and looks back at what's happening in Canada and the US with respect to all of this Orthodox fever. And he's just like, this is so weird living in Romania. This is so weird. Because of course, people in Romania or Georgia or Russia or Ukraine, I mean, since the end of the Cold War, one of the most vibrant conservative religious movements in Sacramento have been Ukrainian, Slavic, Russian evangelicals. I mean, whenever there's sort of a culture war thing that happens here, these people will show up on their streets with the placards to protest the gays. They are not bashful about it. And to the degree that when one of my sons going to public high school was known as white, not Russian, because, there were so few white, not Russians that he got labeled with this just because his hair was dark. They had to differentiate himself from all of the Russians he went to school with the Hispanics, the Chinese, the Japanese, everything in Sacramento. So it's, and that's the way in which there's sort of a shtick that, well, it's the original church and it's the true church. And we can just sort of sidestep all of this nasty Enlightenment business. And I will close my eyes and here I am in Constantinople. And I just look at that and I think, you want a VR headset with that?
When I talk to the Georgians here, I point out the fact that, your art you never had the Renaissance here. And when the Georgian artists finally did discover the West, it was at the tail end, beginning of the 20th century, when most of the fruits of the Renaissance were starting to fall away. And so you got these flatter paintings again, which meshed perfectly with their iconographic style. But it is interesting to me seeing it from the outside. And, I deeply appreciate my Orthodox brethren here. And I considered it something of a victory when one of them the other day was talking about we Orthodox. Then she turned and looked at me and said, we Christians. And I said, yeah, thanks for including me. Because there is this weird sense that it's also this weird national sense, which you do not get anymore certainly not America. And also, I think, in our first conversation, we talked about the Schaeffers and Frank Schaeffer, who had converted to Orthodoxy. And somehow he managed to convert to Orthodoxy and remain very liberal, very liberal, which was really funny to me because I know who the Orthodox, but evidently because they don't make a big deal of, discussing a 24-hour day creation, or, they tend to leave a lot of science and religion out of it, that sounds like liberal, but it isn't. You're just not looking at it right.
So kind of where the TLC has been is, if you want your hardcore ortho bros, you can go to, Jay Dyer, but even Peugeot is sort of tainted in the minds of a lot of ortho bros.
I consider him very Protestant.
Yeah. And so a lot of our Orthodox that are very active in the TLC, I think, tend to be a little bit more cognizant of the fact that what they are establishing is Orthodoxy in America, which is going to be different from Romanian Orthodoxy, Antiochian Orthodoxy, Greek Orthodoxy, that on one hand, it's going to be yet another hybrid.
Right.
Which, of course, the reason you have all of these other Antiochian and Greek and Russian and Ukrainian is because all of those are hybrids too. That's why you got all the labels.
Right. American Christians also tend to want the buffet approach. And that is to say, I want this one. And then, I don't like the way it tastes anymore, so I want this one now. And that, the American concept of choice in churches, it's going to affect the Orthodox just as well as anybody, because that's America. Yeah.
and they have, and so then I was mentioning on the live stream, okay, so, so I was listening to this podcast, and by one of these high profile internet Orthodox priests, and he was talking to somebody who's running the numbers, and they're like, we need like 500 new clergy a year in America just to deal with retirement and death of clergy. Mm-hmm. And our institutions are putting out about 100. That's to maintain. That's not to grow.
Right.
And again, what happens in Protestantism is you don't have a minister. Well, you sort of pick your person with the most interest and most respect to do something with the Bible. And you take all of this off the shelf stuff that we're just simply immersed in the Christian product manufacturing infrastructure in America, and off your little non-denominational or whatever Baptisty or evangelical church, off you go. You can't do that in Orthodoxy.
No.
And so, they're asking, the people who are in the know are asking serious questions about how viable is this? And the fact that I remember one of my colleagues in Sacramento having a conversation with his good friend who is an Orthodox priest whose wife died. And now if you're an Orthodox priest and your wife dies, and you're a good Orthodox priest, you don't remarry.
No.
Now, American pastors, when their wife dies, they often remarry. So he's a great priest. My friend is utmost respect. And they're talking one day. My friend planted his church in a seeker method. And he says, talk to me about how you do evangelism. And the priest said to him, we're not ready to do evangelism. We don't have our monastery. We don't have our cathedral. We don't have our, and it's like, yeah, but you know what? You know what's doing evangelism? The Peterson-Peugeot pipeline and YouTube. But it's not just evangelism, because what you catch them with is what you catch them to. And so all that subtle syncretism, and I'm not saying they're doctrinally impure, I'm not saying they're simple, I'm not saying any of those things, but your church will be formed by whatever it is that YouTube forms into us. Right. And that will now be a part of the deep code of the American Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm. And what that is, we probably won't know the consequences of that code for decades or centuries. But that is what will create Orthodoxy in America.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Whenever I've discussed Peugeot's symbolic interpretations of things. The Orthodox here just are kind of like, what? Oh, we don't understand what you're talking about. But then again, it's totally enculturated. It's totally a part of everything. So I tend to look at the Orthodox Church here as not that I go to church, is that I'm inside of it.
Yes.
Right.
And it is a cultural Christianity. I mean, when Richard Dawkins talks about cultural Christianity, there's like 2 inches on the floor. You're swimming in it.
Oh, yeah. No, they have little boxes on the street where you can donate to the church. Little steel boxes, I must say. But still, you're crossing over some bridge going over or under underpass on their highway. There'll be a little box for you to donate to the church. They say 83% of the people here are Christians. And my observation is, no, they're not. It's like all Christian statistics. It's, buffered by all those Christmas and Easter people, and people who identify as Christian and certainly don't want to identify as the new thing. Although the younger people here are getting more westernized all the time. That's what a lot of the protesting here has been about. I don't know if I want to get into all that. You can ask me if you're interested at the end. But one thing I wanted to point out is that, to me, something interesting is going on. And I'll tell you how I thought about it, is that a girl here recently said, I want to go to New York City. To all the Georgians who want to get educated, want to go to New York City. I'm going like, what are you talking about? You realize you wouldn't make enough money in a year to afford a month's rent.
It's so funny because I grew up there, and if someone said, Paul, we're going to pay you X amount to go to New York City, my wife, who only visited there when my parents were, my wife was like, I don't want to live in New York City. I really don't want to live in New York City. And I'd be like, I completely understand what you're saying, honey, because I lived there my first 20 years growing up.
Well, the funny thing is that people have here, it's like America is New York City, Florida, Southern Florida, and Disney World, Texas, Cowboys, and maybe Austin, I don't know, Southern California, Los Angeles, Hollywood, maybe Washington, D.C., maybe San Francisco, I don't know. And that's about it. When I say Alaska, they go, ooh, it's cold. And I go like, well, where I lived, it was all right. It was kind of like St. Petersburg in Russia. And they'd be like, oh, and they don't have any real idea. And so, Georgians go to New York City. They live with a bunch of friends out in the furthest part of Queens or Brooklyn. And they, takes them an hour to get into Manhattan on the subway. And this one person I was talking to, she said, yeah, my friend said it's so expensive. I said, yeah, it's so expensive at the edges of Brooklyn. You should take a hint here. But the strange thing is, but what I told her is, she says she wanted to do art studies. There's this girl who works at a bookstore here. She imports books. She's very intelligent, very bright. And I told her, you should go to London. And I realized, I think something's happening in London. And it was just through my little estuary meeting and realizing all the stuff that I pay attention to that's coming out of London.
Yeah.
What was your feeling when you were there?
Yeah, I think so. Well, yeah. So I've spent my 2 trips to Europe. I've spent time in both trips in London. Usually staying with Londoners. They've been very gracious and generous to me. And we've done estuary meetings in London. I do have a sense that London is working on a lot of the stuff we're talking about in a way that New York is not. I'll say it that way. London, so I actually there's a church that I preached in a couple times ago, and they're looking for a new pastor. And so somebody wrote me, said, would you consider moving to London? And I thought, boy, if asked to move to New York, yeah. I would think, but when they said move to London, part of me was like,
well, truthfully, I've been to London many times. This is the first time in a long time that I've enjoyed myself there.
Interesting.
And for various reasons. One was I discovered the used bookstores, which is just kind of an omission on my part from earlier trips. But I think it was just realizing the Christian stuff and the stuff from this new culture of people, creating a new public square, essentially.
Yeah.
These different people there, and wasn't that ARC conference there?
Yeah, that was there. Yeah.
And it just seems that, it's just like I can listen to The Rest is History with Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, these are wonderful discussions.
Yeah.
There's no problem.
Yeah.
Not that London is any sort of holy land and doesn't have all the problems that big cultural places have. But it just struck me that something was germinating there.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Well, London has been a place that has reliably, when you go back, Dominic Sandbrook's, I mean, a lot of the history that in terms of music and and fashion and art. I mean, London, there are many big important cities in the world, but in terms of the English-speaking world, I mean, you might argue that London is it? I mean, it's rivaling New York and Los Angeles. It certainly is, and maybe at this point where you notice superseding it.
Yeah, the problem with Los Angeles is always that it's so spread out.
Yeah,
and there are so many people who come there for the film industry, which puts a patina of falsehood, a mask on everyone. So it's very hard to find the good people. They're there, and Los Angeles has very good people. But it's more difficult for certainly someone arriving there. New York City is kind of in a weird place right now in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah.
The problem with all these places, though, is they're all so expensive right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things I must confess about my trip was they say that the whole point of taking a trip is to finally get back to your own bed, which was never more true than on this trip, where I was just so wiped out.
But how has the internet changed all of this? Because in a way, of course, we can participate in culture making from Tbilisi, Georgia, from Sacramento, California. We can participate in culture making from no places at a speed, because people would be able to participate in book writing. You've got Hemingway down in Key West, but we've been able to participate in culture making at a speed and with a reach that is unprecedented. And so then you have the question: okay, how do cities like London and New York and Los Angeles now play into this new way of making culture? So when I was in London last time, Tayo got us tickets to I saw Ian McGilchrist do a little lecture there with another guy. It was a great time. I when I was in Edinburgh, I saw Alistair McGrath. I went to an Alistair McGrath lecture up in Edinburgh, and it was like, I can't do this in Sacramento.
No, well, certainly not.
No, and I mean, Sacramento is not a nothing place.
Well, how many people in Sacramento? Over 1 million?
And the whole area is about 2 million.
Okay. Well, there's about 1.5 million people here, including the recent 2 years ago 100,000 Russians that showed up, who have really changed many things here. Yeah, I just went to a Russian event like 2 weeks ago. Someone giving a lecture. It was actually an American giving a lecture, but he knew Russian and was very knowledgeable. And he had a very good point. And he was obviously a Christian as well. And he was going back to live in Arizona. And I was just like, what do you mean you're going back? Now that I've found you here, not that I don't have Christians to talk to. And in fact, here's one of the things you can do here that you can't do in most places. We had a philosophical supra. Now, the supra is the Georgian ritual meal where you have a certain order in the toasting, a table, just mounds of food sitting on it. And then people go around and they give toast. But between the toasts, you have conversation. But this one was all philosophical conversation. And I have a friend named Lasha who comes over here every few weeks. And he loves talking to me because he says, I have never heard anyone who says the things you say. And I'm going like, well, what can I tell you? It's just I have different sort of experiences. But at the same time, his own perspective is very interesting. But I'm going to have some sort of discussion group at my house in the next week or so, 2 weeks. It won't be an estuary, but I'm very much cherry picking the people I want to come. So a couple of Georgians. There's a French guy I just discovered who lives on the top floor of my building. There's a couple of Americans here, different perspectives. I would like to get these people together just to talk. And last year I did this experiment called a gathering in Georgia, where I put the word out for anyone to come here. I got 6 guys, just men between 20 and a little under 40. And I got some who are lurkers around your neck of the woods. So I had Teddy from Israel and Simon from Brooklyn, yeah. They were really, it was really interesting. But what was fascinating was hooking them up in reality to being here.
Yes.
And they got a shovel full of Georgian culture. I took them to meet people who do things, puppeteers and dancers and other people. In fact, we went to see a ballet here, which was very inexpensive and very good. And then 2 nights later, the central ballerina was here talking with them. And Teddy was just like, how could she do this? I mean, her dancing was very sensual, but at the same time, she's very much a Christian, and his mind was kind of frying. So he went and just talked to her about it. I was sitting right next to them as they were talking, would occasionally say something. And then I opened it up for all of us to talk to each other. Interestingly enough, all the Georgians were basically in agreement that they wanted to go to America because they thought it was better. And all the people from the Netherlands and Latvia and Switzerland and Israel and Brooklyn and Mississippi were all saying, what are you talking about? You want to go to Western Europe and America? Do you have any idea what's going on there right now? And they were just saying, oh, it's got to be better than this. And they kind of like, no, you don't understand. Your culture is still intact. You have an essence to who you are. You all know very clearly that you're Georgians, you know. And I was talking with the girl I was telling you at the bookstore, and I was saying, like, she goes, I really want to go there. It's just, you know, things are getting. And I said, okay, well, let me answer this one question for me. Do you think that a biological man can become a woman equal to a biological woman? And she goes, well, no, because I've never met one liberal person here who ever said yes to that question. I said, well, until you can answer that question, yes, you're going to be in trouble if you go to New York. Because you're going to meet a lot of people, especially there was this one girl who wanted to go to a design fashion school. And I said, you have no idea what you're getting into, you know, I mean, because it's going to be, I mean, I said, and you've got to really think about what you're specializing in. You've got to be grounded, because you're going to have people come and just, their whole perspective on life is something you can't really put into your head right now. So,
well, and I think the reverse is true. And I think the Orthodoxy thing is that you've got people in the West are like, I'd love to go to Georgia and I'd love to become a monk. And I'm thinking, really? Are you thinking that you're going to become a monk for a season? Because I remember when I got ordained in the Christian Reformed Church, and I'm reading this stuff and it's like, wait a minute, I've signed on to this thing for life. And the Christian Reformed Church has sort of been backing out. But in terms of the tradition we inherit, once you become a Christian Reformed minister, that's it. This isn't like, I'm going to do this for 5 years and then maybe I don't know.
That's the whole thing with being Orthodox here as well.
Yeah.
You don't sign up and then when it gets uncomfortable, you split to go to another church.
And it's exactly this aspect that if you look at, say, what's happened in the Christian Reformed Church over the last 100 years, 50 years,
Mhm.
60 years. It's people have been opting for choice. I want to be able to go to this church that I grew up in, and then I want to leave. And that's sort of normal. Okay, so maybe a job, but okay, so you're going to leave. But right there's a little transition that nobody paid any attention. Okay, so you go there as an adult. Well, the idea is that you're going to stay in this church, and then maybe we're going to have a network of Christian Reformed churches so that when you hop to other places, you pick up where you leave off. And all the preaching is the same, and all the liturgy is the same, and all the thinking is the same. And so that is the system. And then people are like, no, but what if I want a Christian Reformed church where we speak in tongues?
Well, that's one of the weird things about America is, for instance, in Alaska, it was just assumed that many of the kids would leave and go off to college, and then we would never see them again, except when they came back to visit. So it doesn't matter what church you go to, even if you keep going to a church, there's very little difference, as you very well know, between a Presbyterian and a Methodist and a Baptist in America. I mean, in some places, maybe, but for the most part, no.
All
they're all
one
just
thing, sort of.
Protestant.
And you were mentioning before how, okay, so Frankie Schaeffer is Orthodox, and you think, well, he's super, he's not against the woke by any means. You listen to Frankie Schaeffer.
No.
But, and, it was a long time ago that somebody pointed out to me that, well, the main line, the important thing is the liturgy. So you go in there and you do the liturgy, and then you leave. And so, and what's so interesting about sort of this Orthodox thing is, like, many of the people desiring to get into Orthodox are like, I really want a priest to be in my life and all in my business to really help me be holy. And it's like, I bet you want that priest in certain parts of your life until that priest starts poking his nose into a place in your life where you don't really want him. Right. And I remember I had a conversation with a woman who called me, and she'll never be on the channel, but she had a variety of issues, and she was connected with this tiny little Orthodox church, and there was this Orthodox priest who was giving her, again, now this is all about authority. He was giving her very clear directions in terms of how she should manage very particular parts of her life. You did not have sort of this public-private framing that many churches have. Pastor will talk about this, but he's not going to press you on it. We're fundamentally libertarians here. We're religious consumers. And she was calling me and asking me, she's like, well, and she actually grew up Christian Reformed, which is why she called me. I grew up Christian Reformed, and yada, yada, and these things happen, and these things happen. But now with this Orthodox priest is telling me I should do these things. Should I listen to him? And I listened to the kinds of things the Orthodox priest was thinking. I was thinking, well, these are pretty big things for you. How much skin does he have in this game for you? I mean, if in fact some of these things he's telling you to do really go bad, is he really going to backstop you financially and in these other areas of your life to pick up where these things leave off? Right. Because that's part of the difficulty in America is that I recently saw this thing on Twitter about it is consent, non-consent sexuality. This was like, the AI people in San Francisco, and a big thing is consent, non-consent. I'm like, what does that mean? So then I looked it up, and like I usually do with the internet, and then I'm horrified. Oh, this means basically I give you global permission to do sexual things to me that I am not consenting for in the moment. I'm like, people do this? Apparently they do. But that's kind of what's going on with I want a consent, non-consent type of relationship with my priest where I'm going to basically open the door and he can, and it's a he can basically command this and that and this and that, and I'll trust him for everything. Fortunately, I'd say probably most of the priests, the Orthodox priests in America, are trustworthy, and they're not going to ask you to do something or tell you to do something that you shouldn't do. I'm not afraid of that. But most Americans are not prepared for a priest telling them to do something that most Americans think is immoral or unethical or unwise or foolish. Right. But that's the level that the it's like someone making the comment that people, in Judaism, people look at these really observant groups and are like, oh, isn't it wonderful how they really practice their religion every day? And I'm like, you wouldn't last 2 weeks living in that community. You have no idea what authority looks like. And that goes for a lot of Pentecostal churches too, that really also believe in authority. So,
well, and people also get this romantic idea about the Hutterites and Amish and such like that as well. But I understand why, is because they look solid in the face of the liquidity of all belief structures in the West.
Yep.
And we're just sinking through the floor, looking for that secret sacred self. And that's our only, pole star, is to become yourself. Whereas I think that's just Gnosticism with you're already yourself.
You really are.
Or the Jewish comedian Jackie Mason said, my psychiatrist said to look for myself. So I said, well, why don't you come help me? Maybe we can find him. Maybe he doesn't want to pay the bill. Who is this self that everyone wants to become? What is the dream we're all following? Well, we've had this stuff, of course. But the problem is, with that as the central focus of a life, everything becomes secondary. So that includes family, children, religion. If it doesn't doesn't give you the feels.
If it's not authentic to you, if you can't say this is authentic to me, but then take this dynamic and add the internet. Because what people see of me or you or Jonathan Peugeot or Paul Kingsnorth or Martin Shaw is two-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And so on YouTube, well, now we're into prophilicity. Mm-hmm. They've got icons behind them, and maybe they're, my friend Nathan Jacobs, he's tatted up with iconography, and right. So you think you fill in the blanks. It's just like your people looking at America. They've got all these tiny little low resolution impressions. In the Dominican Republic, people talked about Nueva York and Miami. Those are just like the two places in America everybody wanted to go, Nueva York or Miami. Right. And but it's a tiny little low resolution thing. And that's why I often say to people are like, oh, Pastor Paul, if I lived in Sacramento, I would come to your church. It's like,
you're not ready for that.
Watch the Freddie and Paul show.
You're not ready for watch that for a while.
Yeah. See, if tell me that you have watched every minute of the Freddie and Paul show for the last 2 years, and maybe, just maybe, you would fit into this church, because
right.
It's I mean, that show is unwatchable often, but I enjoy it because
well, when I see just the homeless statistics alone for Sacramento, most people they imagine you as this kind of like being in a nice Protestant church, clean white walls, whatever. They don't imagine what's out on the streets. And there's a reason why you had to build fences and to, dig things up and throw trash bags away and all of this stuff, and I'm sure clean up excrement and, get rid of the smell in certain areas and, all this other stuff. And they just don't, and I can intuit that because I grew up in California. I've always stayed up with what's going on in California. But a person living, in so many different places, certainly Europe, just can't picture it. I mean, I would say Paul, I love you, but Sacramento,
You know how hot it gets in Sacramento in the summer?
Yes, I do. Yeah, 100 is a normal temperature in the summer. That's 38 degrees for you, all you non-Americans out there.
No, that's right. And so, and that then sort of goes back to sort of a basic thing, which is, well, why don't you try being a Christian where you're at? Why don't you try being a Christian in the family that you have, in the job that you have? try figuring out, try to be a Christian in the church where you're in right now, or maybe the church that's next door. And you'd be like, well, I don't want to be around those people. Well, fair enough. I'm not going to tell you, again, this is where I'm not Orthodox. I'm not going to say, all right, I expect you here every week without fail, and I expect you to do these things. And these are, one of the huge shifts in all of this has been just basically the pervasive consumer libertarian ethos. And that is the syncretism that has permeated the Christian Reformed Church in many ways over the last, 100 years. I listened to stories from my grandparent that I remember my grandmother telling me about basic things about church. I remember things even in my youth, and it's like, we are so libertarian. This is all about choices that you agree with. And I've told this story before. I would have people who would come to me and they'd be sort of like neo-traditional, like, Pastor, you should make these other people stop doing that. I'm like, oh, okay. So you really think that pastors should you need me to be a little bit more authoritarian, a little bit more directive. You really want me to sort of lean in. When I see something wrong, I should tell you and really turn up the heat to do it. Yeah, that's what you should do to these people. Say, okay, well, why don't we begin with you? Would you like me to even just tell you some of the things that I see that I think are not measuring up, and they look at me in horror because they are the center of their little authentic traditional Christianity.
Yeah, we can talk about how you deal with your money or what your sexual relationships are like, and immediately.
What about your church attendance? You're annoyed that these people come in late. You only come twice a month, right. And you never come to Sunday school.
Well, I know a girl who lived in Alaska. She went to the small Assembly of God church there, one of the old school Pentecostal churches, which was quite mild in Alaska. Anyway, she went to their university, which was in the Seattle area, and was enough to poison her for the rest of her life against Christianity, because she had to use a swipe card to get into chapel. All the kids there were obsessed with going to the mall and shopping. And she just said, I don't understand what I'm doing here. And eventually I did help her go to L'Abri, which helped her a lot, although it didn't save her faith, but that's, one of the biggest devil's bargains in American culture is the bargain we made with consumerism as a religion.
Yes.
Speaking of the great American syncretism, it goes way back too. It goes back to the snake oil salesman and the minstrel shows. It goes back to the guy coming with his bottle and selling you stuff, and people going like, oh, whatever it takes. It goes back to Spiritism in the 1840s. It goes, there all these things, all those revivals and stuff. For instance, people often forget that the Second Great Awakening was also the awakening of the Mormon Church. It was also the awakening of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that what happens with these awakenings is like many people say that I think this is Tom Holland's basic thesis, is that what happened in the 60s was essentially, some people have called it another Great Awakening, which is the way he's looking at it too. But in this case, and I don't think he even knows anything about the Jesus movement. Not much. I've never heard him talk.
I've never heard him talk about it. No, right.
And I wanted to talk to him just to say, hey, you need to understand this was the reaction. Whatever that was happening in the other churches. I mean, I know he talks about, the civil rights movement and stuff, but I was in the grandstands in the San Francisco Bay Area. I watched the whole thing, and then I became part of what I found out was the Ground Zero Jesus People Church. And in fact, I've recently been in contact again with my pastor from that church.
Really?
And I'm thinking of doing an interview with him if he'll do it, because I think he's got some very interesting. So he's like one of the ground zero people of the Jesus movement. He started off going to the Southern Baptist Seminary in that area. But nevertheless, so that little tidbit, that artifact, and then look at the Jesus movement through that popular Kelsey Grammer movie, Jesus Revolution,
that was just out.
Yeah, I have that on
Very
my
popular. And there are ways in which you watch that and think, yeah, they're getting some of that. But there's other ways in that when you watch the movie, it's like, wow, the world has really changed.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Why do Christians wear jeans and T-shirts in church now? Jesus movement. Why do we sing those repetitious songs? Jesus movement. You know, why, you know, so many things actually, you know, what pumped up the Christian media? Jesus movement. So many things changed in America as a result of that, but they're kind of underneath. It's like a hidden strain that most people don't, and I don't think Tom Holland knows that much about it. I would like to talk with him about it because I would like to enlighten him about the importance of it.
Yeah.
But the recent book that came out, God's Forever Family. Did you read that? The History of the Jesus Movement.
Yes.
That's a great book. Yeah.
Lots of detail.
That's the first book. I've got about 7 or 8 books on the Jesus movement, about 4 of them from the original times, and about 2 or 3 from recent times, including Kent Philpott, my old pastor, his recent Memoirs of a Jesus Freak, which I'm sure he used the word Jesus Freak just to appeal to the young, because we didn't call ourselves that. But here's the thing, is that's the first book I read. And he also interviews Kent in that, and I can tell he's gotten a lot of information from Kent, which is one of the things which never happened in the other one, which is why in this book I said, he finally understands the picture.
Yeah.
And he really shows it starting in the San Francisco area with the hippie movement and then spreading out.
Yeah.
And
I think there's I mean, it sounds weird to think of the this American explosion and interest in Orthodoxy as sort of in line with the Jesus movement, but there are relationships between them.
Right.
They're, you know, and in terms of the growth. I mean, this American Orthodoxy movement is it's a revival.
It's a phenomenon. It definitely, I think, given, you know, that was back in the 60s and early 70s, the initial impetus of that. And I think we're seeing something on a regular cycle, so to speak, of these movements in America. This one's got some very different aspects to it, as you would expect. And part of it is to lean against the heavy syncretism of the churches. But again, there's the American landscape to consider.
Yes.
And
the fact that so many of these people are like Jonathan Peugeot. I mean, first the jump out of Quebec Catholicism into, you know, basically American fundamentalist evangelicalism, and now into Orthodoxy. It's like some historian looking back at there is going to be like, of course.
Buffet.
Yeah. and that's not in any way a critique of Jonathan.
No, Jonathan is absolutely sincere. He's doing an amazing job. But he does an amazing job precisely because he's actually speaking in a way that evangelicals understand.
Yeah. And he's got, ironically, he's got evangelical foundations. So if someone wants to sort of attack Jonathan, it's like, you know, he's got all those presuppositions that he inherited from his family of origin in terms of there's some things that have changed, but in terms of things that evangelicals will sort of point to,
right,
you're not going to find fault with him.
Right.
Except, of course, he's making pictures. But then again, just look at, I was a child, and, you know, my father's church was, you know, part of it was racial reconciliation, but that was a part of the Jesus movement too. And so a lot of the people who came to my father's church in the 60s were people from the CRC that came from intact families. They knew how to have marriages for the most part, things like that. But they were moved by this spiritual stuff going around racial reconciliation around. And so I grew up with a lot of people who were basically about your age,
right,
who were coming in, and they were just surprised that they could go to a CRC that felt a little bit Jesus movement-y and did racial reconciliation and worked with heroin addicts. And it was all in the New York City area. And, and we had campouts. And so I grew up just in that vibe. But of course, I was 10 years younger, so I was just watching it as a kid. And
Right.
But it was the Christian Reformed version.
Is that when I got to L'Abri in 1978 and stayed there through into 79 for almost a year, most, not all, but I would say, we'll say 75% of the people I was meeting were coming from the Reformed environment. And I was meeting Calvin college students. I was meeting, and this would hold true later when I came in 1987, although by that time I had heard that they'd had so many Calvin college students who all seemed to come with only one question on their mind: what about predestination? And, such an Orthodox question, rather Reformed Calvinist question. And in a way that kind of typified how L'Abri had kind of lost its bearings at that time. They'd become too well known because Schaeffer, was obviously, he was a pretty committed Reformed Calvinist. And, but since his passing in 84, people wanted to go, there was that other spirit of L'Abri, which I think was partly the Reformed Presbyterian spirit, but the other part of it was Schaeffer's openness to discuss existentialism or to discuss modern art with like Rookmacher and bring him in to discuss the things of the day. Let's watch an Ingmar Bergman movie. Let's read this strange novel over here. Let's take a trip down to Italy and go to Florence and look at art. That kind of thing, just over the mountain. So that to me was a central part of L'Abri.
And those Calvin students visiting became Calvin College professors, and they were my professors. They brought that to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, and eventually L'Abri in Switzerland got its mojo back by what a syncretistic phrase. Mojo being the African spiritual communion with the inanimate object and the spirits inside of it. Anyway, but they got their mojo back, and they started to engage more with. By the time I went back, I was 87. I was worried that they would even be there next time. But then in 93, the next time I went back, we were dealing with real postmodern issues quite clearly. And I was really glad. And I had also come from New York armed with lectures so frightening. I said, can I do one on performance artists? I'll do another one on the musical developments of the early 90s, and that really, but it was interesting. They let me do it. And at the same time, they were worried that I would trigger people's emotional problems. So
Bert, I'm going to turn the tables on you now.
Go for it.
And because our first conversations, I had a lot of these early conversations. I talked to you, I talked to Ron Dard, I talked to Warren Mills, my friend from Australia, many of whom had done the L'Abri thing. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of talk about Jordan Peterson and L'Abri, yada, yada, yada. To what degree is TLC, does that sort of have the same, so how does that connect with L'Abri that you saw or understood?
There is a connection in that, but the difference is that the people in the TLC are basically all setting their agenda for themselves. The people come in there and they are, I think many of them are considering things they hadn't considered before, which is like L'Abri. The difference is L'Abri's Christian structure was always very clear once you were inside of it. But they would say, you can ask any question. You can, and of course, L'Abri had a lot of people who I would say were outpatients from the hospital, which was Christianity in the West, and in a sense, for many people, L'Abri was a last chance place to go to find some sort of connection between faith and the intellect, faith and creativity, faith and community, things like that. Whereas what you're doing and what the TLC is something very different. For one thing, the mediating structure of the internet means whatever we talk about community, it's always in the abstract. It's never, which is one thing I've really wanted to, which is why I'm trying to invite people here. I'll do the gathering thing here again, because I thought that really worked. The guys who came here were just like all very jazzed about it when they came. They wanted more of the town. Unfortunately, I made a mistake in my planning, but they got 4 days here, so that was good. And then we had 5 up in the mountains, and it should have been the other way around. But I think that you allow people to say all sorts of things, which I think is great. I mean, I enjoy hearing Sam's what was it, local church, which is where he came out of, and I understand what he believes and such. He interviewed me once, but he didn't go into that. He wanted to know about the Jesus movement, but he didn't go into his own background on the subject, which I think would have been challenging for him, because I would have come around and said, oh, well, we knew those guys very well. And Ken Philpott could tell you his conversations with those guys, but then there was what you're also, you let Grim Grizz, many people don't even understand Grim speak, but he says some fascinating stuff, and it's totally unique. It's very surreal, very, he's a product of the countercultures of the recent past, and it shows, and he's a wonderful guy. You let, Orthodox come in, Catholics come in, even some Reformed folks come in, even. Who doesn't come in are your standard stick in the mud evangelical Protestant Americans. Yeah. Because they wouldn't even know how to find such a thing online. Yeah. So it's I wouldn't say it's a hothouse, but I would say it's like a field where there are some very interesting plants growing, and I think there's more to it than we understand at the moment, and I feel good for whatever my connections are within this world. I don't go to, do all the dialogues and stuff like that, because I've got my own stuff going on. And
you've got your whole library there. You've got a lot of work ahead of you.
I do. Well, you should see the library that isn't here. I had a French puppeteer friend here last October, and she was talking to a Russian puppeteer, and she was saying, oh, you should see his library. It's going to fill up this entire house. But I kind of like what I do, which is to say, for me, reality is always first. I've always felt like if a phone is ringing or someone contacts me, I only have one app that rings on my phone, and that's Facebook. And the only reason I have that is because the Georgians all use that for their way of telling you they're at the door downstairs.
Really?
Yeah, they don't use it. It's like Georgians and Russians do not use social media at all for keeping in touch with each other. So I have a friend of mine who was also another former Labrie student, and she lives in Berlin now. Her father was a pastor. He was a pastor in charge of Young Life for Eastern Europe. Was it Young Life? Campus Crusade for Eastern Europe. And but she drifted away from the faith, but she's remained a very good friend, and she lives in Berlin. And she came here. She met one of my very fascinating Russian puppeteer friends here, and so she wanted to keep in touch. So they exchanged email addresses, and she sent her stuff, and then here's nothing back. And I said, this friend came over a little bit later and said, my friend Malay wants to know I said, you don't write back, do you? And she goes, no. I said, it's because in the Soviet Union, all communication, all letters was monitored. And so people got out of the habit of, it's only about the in-person discussion. And the only reason you use the internet is to say, I'm coming into town, or I'm leaving town, or I'll be over soon. And she goes, you understand exactly. And the Georgian, so hard for my American friend in Berlin to understand, because for her, it's just like keeping up. You want to keep up with people on a regular basis, and they just don't do that. The internet for them is not a place where you do little chit chat between people. And, how are you this week or something? I think the idea of a Christmas card with people's faces on it once a year would just drive them insane. but also, even among the teenagers here who all have phones, I will see them outside the back yard. They take the benches. The benches aren't like this. They put the benches so they're not far from each other and facing each other. And then they talk into the night while they're smoking, because so many Georgian teenagers smoke. And I just had an interesting conversation with a guy, Mark Jackson, whom you talked to in the not too distant past. But he lives here, and I've met him before, and we got together and I did a conversation with him. And at one point he said, people need to go back to smoking. And I said, I understand what you mean, because maybe it's healthier to smoke and talk than it is to simply be scrolling through your phone all the time. Because on a human level, you might die earlier, but at least you will have had human conversations before you die.
Yeah. Boy, what a radical thing that would be to say in California.
Oh, yeah.
Where all the smokers are exiles and they keep getting pushed further and further from the building.
Yeah, and I don't like smoking at all myself. I don't mind smoking at all myself. But when I see the teenagers outside talking to each other and not texting people far away, I say that is a healthier thing, because what we're doing in the virtual world is really doing things to us. We're conducting a global experiment upon ourselves that we do not have the answers for what will happen as a result. And
what's one of the places that I see some of the most talking face-to-face culture here in Sacramento is among the homeless. They've these people, for a lot of these people, the reason they're homeless is because of other people and they don't really handle other people well. And so then the state of California keeps trying to pile them together. And I'm just thinking, you just really don't know these people, do you? But when they do get together in little twos and threes where they can, sort of want to, they have wonderful street conversation. They are in the street. They're talking all night. They're sharing money. It's a funny little expression of, let's say, the Acts 2 church, where they live together and share all their things in common until they can't, because they
right. Well, there's a great song by Richard Thompson, English guitarist and songwriter, singer, and he has a line in one of his songs: "You can find the real thing. It'll only cost £1 down where the drunkards roll."
Yep. That's right. That's exactly right. Well, we've gone 2 hours, Bern. Do you have something more, or shall we land the plane now? It's getting late for you.
I just want to put one phrase into your ear, and it's something that I think is the thing that will help us through this the time we're going through, because the left and the right extremes will get louder, people pulling us. And I've noticed all these, it's just like, oh, you want to support Ukraine, or you don't want to, or you want to support Israel, all these things. People pro this or con that. Yeah. But there's a phrase called the radical center, which to me is a very important phrase, and I certainly didn't invent that phrase. But it's the idea that, it's not being a centrist, but to me it's more like finding that town square. It's that place, that meeting place where we can talk. Yeah. And I think that's where we need to be going towards.
Well, so every Sunday now at 9 a.m. we have our estuary meetings, and that's how I feel, because every now and then someone will bring a guest or some new person will come in, and they'll be all hot and heavy to, we really have to talk about Israel and Palestine, or we really got to talk about Gaza. And You go around that circle and, okay, we really want to talk about Gaza. Okay, now next round, what did you hear that that you'd really like to talk to, and nobody picks that topic? And so we don't talk about it much. It might come up a little bit and interwoven,
Right.
but what's been so interesting about doing this every week, and it's very seldom that we have exactly the same group of people around in the circle. There's always some visitor coming in or somebody who can't make it or something like that. But so often the conversations they're personal, they're relational. I was just impressed, doing it again Sunday morning. I was just sitting there thinking, wow, these people are sharing their lives with each other. And for some of these people in the room, they either only see each other here or they've never seen each other before. And they are sharing honestly and transparently and vulnerably, and they are taking from each other. And so for me, and we didn't even have to smoke or drink. We just kind of had to set the room in the right context. And then at the end of the meeting, it's like, wow, this was really good. I think people experienced some healing. They gained some insight. They participated in something that they will be back again. And so Estuary is sort of this tiny, sneaky little thing that it's not flashy by any means. Boring people will be in it. You'll have people that try to dominate a conversation. You'll have all of those things. But for me, it is a way that busy, wealthy, Western North Americans can sort of pause their life and actually have an unrecorded conversation with a group of other people that are genuinely interested and curious about life and about goodness and about all sorts of things. And I'm just every Sunday morning at 10:30 when I land the plane on that group, it's like, yeah. This is good. This is what we need. This is what the church needs.
It's about the little things. It's not about the big movements.
Yep.
Because it is the accumulation of little things that eventually creates a good thing.
Yeah.
Something genuinely good. And it takes time. It's never fast. It's never flashy. Well, Paul, thanks for talking with me again. And
oh, it's fun. It's always good, Bern. It's always good. Yeah. We have to. I have these conversations like, gosh, we when's the last time we talked? It's been months.
Well, you came aboard for my fundraiser.
That's right.
That was nice, and it brought money too, which is important. So,
well, we'll all be expecting a whole new level of Bernisms now that you have all this material to share with us.
Oh, believe me. Yeah, one of the things that was in there was my 85-hour CD recordings of my history of the 20th century using audio actualities that I did on radio in Alaska. Got away with murder on that one. So, okay. So, well, we're going to say farewell now. Bye.
Well, jeepers, that went on a while. And there's nothing I want to cut out from it. So, that's more than 2 hours worth of your sweet time. And I'm very grateful to Paul for hanging out that long with me on the channel. And I think we had a very interesting discussion. And I think if you were paying attention, you probably found a lot of that very interesting as well. And hey, you know what you could do if you did like that? Share it. Subscribe. You could hit the notification bell and find out when I release things. I've got some new stuff coming up that I want to call your attention to. I've got an interview with Laura Sillenpa from Wisconsin about AI music coming up on the Anadrome channel. I highly recommend that. It was a fascinating discussion, which should chill you because of the developments in AI music. I've got a discussion with a local here in Georgia, a guy named Mark Jackson, who has also been on Paul's channel. But we go out into the park here and have a discussion outdoors. And if you know anything about the news, you'll know that there's been a lot of news coming from Tbilisi, Georgia lately. And I suggest coming to that video to find out some things about what's going on here. Then we've got more stuff is coming. I still have this Taylor Swift stuff. It's all sitting there ready to get edited. I've got more than I can possibly tell you about. What did I just put on? Okay, I did another one on Georgian crossroads and an interesting walk where it's just, hey, if you need to get out of the house, put down your phone and just get out of the house. But if you would like to watch my view, do that. Yeah, I've got stuff coming up on the crematorium. I've put some very odd stuff up there of more AI experiments with photos. I've discovered it's really good for horror imagery, really bad and fake looking for anything resembling beauty. And then on Gravity from Above, we've got more stuff over there as well. I've got kind of a reduction of my library diaries, just all the puppet stuff is over there. And again, another version of my library tour, which if you've seen it here, you've seen it. So, although the puppet stuff is really good to put it all in one place, and there will be more happening over there. So, lots is going on. Stay tuned. Lots more will go on. And thanks for coming. This is Bern from Tbilisi, Georgia, saying, Droebit temporarily. We will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
Well, that's it. Here's your keys. Goodbye, friends, and happy motoring back on the freeway, which is already in progress.
Whew. Well, here goes. Nice feel. Let's see. Oh, how can you be in two places at once when you're not anywhere at all? I think I'll give this old baby a spin on the freeway.
Wrong way. Entering freeway.
Here we go.
Emergency parking only. Merging buses ahead.
Giant slide, 19 holes, underground parking, Midden Hills Retirement Paradise, Slithers only. Easy access.
Goldoni Avenue.
Speedometer check.
Strasbourg Lane, 1 mile.
Speedometer's only got half a mile on it.
Bible Shield and all. 2 miles.
Antelope Freeway north. So I want to go north, or do I want to take the Gomorrah Expressway west?
Shadow Valley Condoms. If you lived here, you'd be home by now. Antelope Hills, selected living, comfortable, easy, okay.
Antelope Freeway, this lane, exit only.
Yeah, I think I'll take the old Antelope. Less traffic.
Easy street over to.
Antelope Freeway, 1 mile.
Clean up Armenia. Get a hairlift.
Antelope Freeway, 1/2 mile.
Chili Avenue.
Let's see what they got in this car.
1/4 mile.
Let's see. We got
Antelope Freeway, 1/8 mile.
lights, wipers,
Antelope Freeway,
defrost,
160.
temperature, and climate control.
Antelope Freeway, 132nd mile.
See what kind of climate I can get.
Antelope Freeway, 160.
Winter Wonderland,
Antelope Freeway,
Spring
1
Fever, Indian
Anadrome
summer,
Freeway 122.
tropical paradise,
Anadrome
tropical
Freeway
paradise. I think I'll give it a try. Wow! What a groove!